Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. We bring you thought-provoking guests and topics every week to challenge your thinking about leadership. Our aim is to help you become the leader that you wish you always had as we learn together and lead together. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honoured today to be joined by Bessi Graham. Bessi is a writer, podcaster, an executive coach, and she focuses in on helping individuals around understanding that it's okay to make money and be successful as well as having an impact on the world. So we're going to talk a lot about mindset today. We're talking about how you describe yourself to the world and how you deal with some of those challenges that you might have, particularly if you're in the audience and you're an altruistic person. You do what you do because you're purpose-driven, you believe in what you do, you want to have a big impact on the world. And then sometimes this dirty word of money and profit can get in the way of you being as impactful as you could. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So without any further ado, Bessi, I would love it if you would give a little bit of your background to the audience and tell us about what led you to go into this kind of work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to have these really important conversations, and you've framed that really beautifully in terms of there's often for people a real struggle with mixing what we have been taught are two very different worlds of doing good and making money. And for me, that journey, or if we go right back to where did this all come from for me? I grew up in a family that was very focused on aspects like social justice and sayings like to whom much is given, much is expected, and this concept of wanting to make sure that we were living a good life, that we were contributing and making a difference in the world. But I'm someone who also is really driven and ambitious and loves business. And so there was always this, okay, where's that spot where I can bring my unique brilliance into the world, but do that in a way that is still true to things that I care about, so that where I can be proud of my contributions, where I can feel like I am making a difference and it's not just simply a selfish aspect of my own career or my own comfort and lifestyle. And so that has led to me really becoming a serial entrepreneur, which I wouldn't have thought I would do when I was younger, but moving from the consulting world, studying leadership. My master's was in counterterrorism. I've studied it at Harvard in leadership and governance, and really always been fascinated about, okay, how do we bring together things like the charitable or nonprofit sector, government and its role, and business and that role of commerce, because I think that they are more powerful when they're together, when we don't sort of pick one and run with that. And so that led to, in 2010, I set up my first organization and really started to bring these things together around building out business models and working with people that were attempting to marry doing good and making money, and help them to start to realize that you don't actually have to choose one of them. And in fact, the competitive edge from a business point of view comes from actually bringing doing good back inside the business. And for those people that you spoke about, where there is more of the altruistic driver to why they are running an organization, for them, you have confidence that you can continue in a sustainable, ongoing way to impact the things you care about if you actually build a sustainable business model. So whichever side people were coming from, my work really for now almost 20 years, but definitely in the last sort of 15 or so, has heavily focused on equipping people to bring those things back together.
Really powerful stuff, Bessi, and I do want to hit that from multiple angles as we go through. I'd love to unpack a little bit more about your own altruistic work. So you describe yourself as, having worked in the dirt in the Pacific Islands and helping villagers and islanders to build themselves up, et cetera, et cetera. Tell us more about your own drives and passions and the work that you've done in the not-for-profit, in the charitable sector, and then we're going to lead up into some of the business aspects.
Yeah, of course. So really, when we think about that aspect of, I mentioned that I'm someone who, I can see a vision, I know what needs to happen, and I love then building things. So whether that's businesses or supporting other businesses in their work. In 2010, the reason that I set up the first organization, the Difference Incubator, was that as an impact investor, so someone looking to invest money in ways that were making a positive impact in the world, but were also having a financial return, there was really actually very few options to invest that money in. If you were wearing a philanthropic hat, there was lots of organizations that you could grant to. But if you were actually looking to invest, so use capital that wasn't just a granting donation bucket, but was to invest, it was pretty hard to have confidence that those organizations could actually pay for the capital that you were lending them. And so that led to the work initially here in Australia and then across the Pacific Islands to say, how do we actually build the capacity of small and medium enterprises who are the drivers of the economy and are creating so much of what societies around the world need to have in the mix, not just job creation, but more broadly in society. And so I set up that organization with that purpose of working with groups to actually build out that sustainable business model. Like I said, we began here in Australia and then we worked with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade here, a federal government department here in Australia, to say our model could work in the Pacific and could actually work alongside the government granting and aid and development funding to, instead of just giving a donation or a grant to a business, let's equip them so they could actually then access private capital and not just rely on donations or granting moving forward, but could have a business model that could actually really have an impact in the world and be confident that it could continue to do that. And I'm a very practical person, so I love to not just have these intellectual academic conversations. I do like those, but I like to make sure I actually understand what's happening on the ground. And as a leader, and now in that role I play working with other leaders as their thinking partner, I think that it's actually really powerful to be able to do two things: to understand the big picture systemic landscape that you're operating on, but to also not lose sight of what does it take for something to work on the ground. And so for me, I've always made sure I am connected to individual business owners that are doing the work. So whether that's spending time in Samoa, working with coconut farmers and actually being in the truck, going around to make sure both as an investor and the person building capacity, do I understand the context you're operating in? Can I anticipate and run scenarios effectively because I'm not just sitting in an office making up, what would the risks be here? So that has been part of my practice. I then spent a lot of time in Papua New Guinea, again, traveling, working with entrepreneurs to make sure I actually understood the context. And I think that's important because whether it is related to us as investors and wanting to understand risks and opportunities, or whether it's down in that level of, from an impact perspective, how do we make sure we are more aware of unintended consequences? We are more tuned in to what's actually going to be needed to achieve those outcomes that we're desiring. That has been and will always be a fundamental part of my practice, is what the wonderful Pamela Hartigan, who's passed away now, but in her work around out of Oxford, where she talked about needing to apprentice with the problem. I would say my work with business owners, both here and in the Pacific, has really been that attempt to make sure I apprentice with the problem, I understand the context, and then I speak into how we could address that, how we could improve it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, this apprentice with the problem. I might come back to that. I think there's something deeper in that. Let me share with you what I'm taking away from everything you've described there, Bessi, and please don't feel shy about correcting me if I miss something along the way. So the things that are jumping into my mind, and forgive the gender specificity of this comment, but it's an older comment, give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime, is the first thing that I'm hearing there. The second thing I'm hearing there is that the government grant element is essentially an initial seed fund, but it sounds like, it sounds like Silicon Valley kind of talk here, where in Silicon Valley people will go through different venture fundings, they'll get seed funding, then they'll go into A funding, B funding, etc., through to an IPO. It sounds like you're doing that, but you're teaching that to people in the Pacific Islands, in Papua New Guinea, etc. So instead of them always having to come back on the same charitable funds, they're using that initial seed fund to get them going, but then you're helping them to understand the language that they might need to speak to then be able to do business on a world scene, to be able to attract new financiers, new investors, potentially new customers when they get into global supply chains around things like whatever it is that they're farming, whether it's coconut trees or whether it's coffee or whatever the case may be. And from an equity point of view, I will say that the majority of those people probably didn't have the opportunities that you and I had growing up to be educated to go and do do business training to go and learn the language. So you're using these programs to level them up so that they can speak the right language on a world business scene, and then they become sustainable instead of always being reliant on those government grant fundings going forward. How's that summary for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two kind of pieces I want to pick up on. One, if we go to the first comment around the teaching people to fish, I absolutely agree with you. That shift is really important. If we connect it back to that idea of apprenticing with the problem, one of the things that we need to make sure we do is to not jump straight in with a solution or like off the shelf, I have the answer. Now, when we add in an aid and development overlay to that, it's even more important not to do that, because I'm not sure that if you've heard this phrase, but there's an aspect that we have to be very conscious of around the savior complex, like coming in and going, oh, you've got a problem, I have a solution for you. So part of what we just need to, and this is a really important thing for all of us as leaders, is just that pause to stop and go, oh, do I have any unconscious bias here? Am I making assumptions? Are there things I don't understand that I'm just jumping in with my solution, thinking, my intentions are good, I'm trying to help, but I may not really yet understand, is teaching the person to fish in this setting the right thing? Or do I need to teach them how to build a boat first? Or like, what's the sequence here? There might be some other steps. So that's an important piece just to stop and think about as a leader. When we then transition into the pieces that you've drawn out around these different types of funding and helping people and equipping them, two things come to mind. One is that education process or mindset shift is just as relevant in a developed context as it is in a developing context, because across the board, we have taken on these unconscious beliefs around that we have to choose. Are you running a charity or are you running a business? And through making these distinctions and setting up really entrenched views and beliefs about what those roles are, we have actually trained and embedded in the social sector a complete disconnect between how you actually need to run a sustainable organization and healthy views around the role of money. So that is as relevant in the developed context as it is in a developing context. And then the other piece that sits related to how we think about different types of capital or the stage of development and organisation is that when we look at the traditional role of government grant funding or philanthropic funding, a big piece that I try to embed in the business leaders and organisational leaders that I work with is that a granting dollar is an incredibly powerful tool that we need to be really careful in how we use it, because it's a limited pool. There's a lot more capital available once you can start to pay for that capital, even if it's interest-free and patient long-term loans, through to capital that you're paying a risk-adjusted return on. There's a lot more capital that sits in that space. But when we look at granting dollars, that is a limited pool of funding. And very often it is being used for things that if we stopped and equipped ourselves properly, we could have tapped into a different form of capital. It would have been justifiable to take on debt for that. But if we look at some of the things within an organization, if you need to buy equipment which directly connects to your ability to make more money in the organization, why would you use a grant for that? There's a direct connection of I buy it, it increases productivity, I then can sell more things and make more money. Take a loan for that. So there is a need for us to respect the role of granting more, both as those taking a grant and as those giving a grant. When we structure a grant dollar, we need to think about it in terms of what does it catalyze? How is it making possible something that there wasn't a different type of capital, or there was a disconnect between what this organization would have to do before they could attract that other type of capital? Okay, now use the grant to catalyze that. Use it to bridge that gap. There will always be some things that need to be funded through granting and where we should give money with no expectation of return. But my experience in the last over 20 years now is that we spend granting dollars on far too many things that don't actually need a grant. And I think as both the grant giver and the grant receiver, we need to do a bit of reflection on that and say, hang on, is this really a good use of a granting dollar? Is this a good way to incentivize the right behavior and increase the chance of getting that positive outcome in the world? If it's not, then let's not use a grant. Let's build out the model and figure out what type of capital we actually need.
So what I'm taking away there in relation to grants versus potentially other private sources of funding, whether it be debt and equity or other sources, is that the granting should be used where there's pretty much no other option. There's nothing else that could be done with this. The second question you said is, what does it catalyse? So is this $1 going to unlock new opportunities that can be greater than the impact of just $1? And then the third one is have a look at what you're using the money for, and if that investment is being used on something that could service a debt, even if it was only interest only for a period of time, but if it's something that can generate a return that services a debt, we'll use private money for that. And then you can then use the grant money more effectively by being more selective about where you use that. And therefore, everyone's benefiting. We're now unlocking new sources of capital with serviced debt, but we're using the grant money where it can have the biggest impact. That really resonates with me. I want to circle back to what you're saying about Saviour Complex. We have covered that a lot in this program, particularly around allyship and around diversity, equity and inclusion. And the things that I'm taking away there, Bessi, the classic Covey statement of seek first to understand, then to be understood. And then I'm hearing a co-creation. So I'm hearing you going in by staying curious and listening to the people that you're trying to help. You're going to learn much more about what their business and what their life and what everything that they stand for is all about before you come in with your own values, beliefs and structures and impose them on them. And by doing that, you're going to be able to co-create something. You're going to be able to take the great things that they already do and then build upon it with your techniques and their ability to then maybe turn it into a sustainable business model. How does that sit with you in terms of this kind of seek first to understand, then to be understood, and the co-creation space of actually working together and not coming in and being the saviour?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a beautiful summary of those different ideas because, again, if we, as a leader, if you actually are confident and can sit in a grounded sense with the skills, expertise, experience, and the kind of tools or frameworks that you have, if you're confident in that, then you should be able to sit and do the listen, understand, take it on, and then be able to trust that you will spot things, you will see what needs to happen, and you will be able to then speak into how this situation could be changed, drawing on those tools, but not needing to be so rigid and pre-prepared and off the shelf that it isn't actually fit for purpose. So again, I would say that one of the pieces of reflection and questioning that we need to do with ourselves as a leader is if we find that is not how we work, if we find that actually, we come in guns blazing, shouting solutions, saying this is what needs to happen, I have a program that will fix that. What is it about our own sense of what we offer, the value we can create and the change that can occur? What is it that isn't sitting well with us that we feel a need to do that and to already be prepared, if you like, for what we end up offering? Because the co-creation piece that you spoke of, the truth is if the people that we're working with or whatever that looks like, whether that's another business that we're working with, whether that's a beneficiary group we're trying to serve, if we come in and impose on people a solution that they don't own, that they don't necessarily even understand, someone might, from an ego perspective, someone might say, wow, you're so clever. How did you come up with that? I love that. That's a great business model. But if you come back a week later, 6 months later and actually say, how's that going? Like, how are you implementing that? If they didn't actually understand and they didn't own, I've actually had that shift. I've had the aha where I've realized the way I'm currently running this organization is so grant reliant and isn't looking at the opportunities I have from a commercial perspective. If they haven't actually been on that journey and landed there themselves, you might feel good and do some great, social media posts about this wonderful work you've done or telling people at a dinner party, I transformed how this organization thought. If they can't implement it, A, the change will never occur. So you haven't actually shifted an outcome. And B, all it's done is be a bit of a feel good exercise for them in the moment and for you to feel like you've contributed, and yet it hasn't landed. So I think if we go back to that idea of co-creation, it's important for multiple reasons. But if our desire is actually to create change, that does not occur unless you take that approach that you framed of unless you come in and you listen first, you make sure you're understanding, you constantly are aware of those power dynamics, particularly if we are coming in with the money, whether that is as an investor or a funder. If we're coming in any any kind of position of power. This also goes for if you're running a nonprofit and you're coming in and working with a beneficiary group. You are in the powerful position there, right? If we are in that position, we need to read that room well. We need to be far more conscious and aware of, okay, how is this power dynamic playing out? And we then need to, as much as possible, give space to voice to other people in that mix and make sure that what we are designing, how we are doing that co-creation is done in a way that respects multiple voices that will get us to a better outcome.
This is really powerful stuff, Bessi, and there's two additional takeaways I'm taking away now, which is the first one is that people support what they create. So if they're being involved in the creation of it, they'll then take ownership, and when they take ownership, they then go above and beyond, and they really put their heart and soul into it. The second one is around experiential learning. If you come in and just do it for them, or you structure it for them, they won't learn anything. Whereas if they're part of the creation of the new business model, they're actually doing it, not just hearing about it, right? So there's lots of debate around Glass's pyramid and whether it's really true or not, but we all know the throwaway items that, people remember 10% of what they read, 20% of what they hear, 30% of what they read and hear, 50% of what they talk about, and then they remember 85% of what they do themselves, 95% of what they can teach someone else. Now, don't put any credence in those numbers because it was just an illustration, but I think we all know and we've all experienced ourselves that when we do something, we always learn more. So that's the two additional takeaways there. People support what they create, and the power of experiential learning. If they're part of the creation of that new business model, they're then going to be able to implement it sustainably going forward instead of always being reliant on the person that set it up in the first place. How does that sit with you, Bessi?
Yeah, I think the piece that I would add to that, going back to what are some of the aspects that we need to think about when we are coming in and doing any of this type of work. One of the pieces I always keep in my mind is that my job when I'm building something, designing something is to make myself redundant. And what I mean by that is if you make something about you, whether it's an organization you set up, whether it's a project you're designing, a business model you're designing, when you do that, it's pretty hard to not be precious about it, to not be defensive about it, to let it go when the time comes that you're no longer the right person to lead it. And so if you go in from the beginning saying, actually, one of the signals that I have succeeded here is that I'm no longer needed, then that's a great way to go about it. In the early days in my work, multiple times over, I would have situations where I would come in, I would use my sort of strategic blink ability that I could see what needed to happen. I would design a strategy or a business model. I'd be like, this is amazing. It's really great. A board would say things like, oh my gosh, you've done more strategy in 3 weeks than we've done in 12 years. And I'd say, well, that's a problem for multiple reasons. But anyway, so you'd have this kind of feedback that was exciting and energizing because you'd done good work. And yet the piece that wasn't in place was their ability to follow through. I hadn't made myself redundant. So it would then come back to a conversation shortly after saying, we love that, but we can't actually implement that. Could you come and do it for 6 months while we find someone who can? And I very quickly realized that's actually not success. That's failure. If I've designed something that they don't own, that they can't implement, and that simply makes me look smart or good, but I haven't been made redundant in that process, then I haven't actually done my job. And so I think that can be a helpful framing to have when you go into anything. That still allows you to bring your brilliance. We each have different skills and strengths. So you're still saying, what's my part in this? But I only am a part of it. The whole thing is not mine. I'm not the answer to all of it. And my job is to do my part and then step out of the way.
Love it, Bessi. And I think that's a leadership lesson for all of us. All leaders should be trying to make themselves redundant because you can't go on and do your next project or your next business or your next whatever your life takes you towards if you're the one that's relied upon for everything in the venture that you're currently doing. So that's in any business. And then when it comes to this charitable work and setting up things for people, I think it becomes even more true. You need to be able to get to the point where you can step away and it's self-sustaining going forward. Really powerful, Bessi. I want to come back to some of this social capitalism and some of the saviour complexes. This will be a semi-complex question, I think, Bessi, but I know we're going to get an amazing answer here. With this also does come the saviour complex associated with the way people perceive it, right? So I'm going to paint the full story and then I would love to hear from you. So to quote Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, there's an unusual quote for a leadership podcast. With great power comes great responsibility. And the business world throughout, I'm going to say most of the world, have got more capital, capital than governments, like you said before. So there's a big untapped resource there. I'm talking about the billionaires of the world. I'm talking about big successful businesses. And let me choose Bill and Melinda Gates as my case study here, right? So they've established a foundation with billions of dollars within it. And from what I can see, they're out there trying to do the right thing. They're trying to have a big impact on the world. And yet you Google search their foundation and go searching. You don't have to search for a lot of people that talk negatively about it and say, oh, it's some kind of manipulation, or it's all about making Bill look good and it's, green limousine type situation. How do, let's say, very successful people out there with access to lots of money who want to do the right thing, how can they do it in a way where people don't question their motives?
So the short answer is you can't, because there will always be people who are going to question motives. There's always people, Brene Brown talks about the piece of not actually taking advice from people in the cheap seats. If they're not in the arena doing the work, then probably don't listen to them. So the big encouragement from me would be, don't let the fact that people will criticize or have their own views or beliefs around money, the role of business, greed, wealth, etc. Don't let the fact that there will be commentary on that stop you from beginning this journey. So that's sort of the first point. I can't eradicate that. It is going to happen regardless of your intentions or the outcomes you're achieving. The second piece, if we just go to your example around the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, there is an old kind of in some ways, I was going to say outdated, but that sounds a bit condescending, but there was a way of doing this that was historically in place, which was make as much money as you can. When you're successful, then you set up a foundation, then you start to contribute. People used to break your life into different categories. Oh, we're in the building wealth stage. Now we're in the I'm retired and I'm going to give back. That to me is now not the way that I'm encouraging people to live their lives. Firstly, if you look at the life expectancy, we're rapidly getting into that category of people are going to be living till they're 100. Aspects of what our work life looks like, the time period over which we want to actually be productive and contributing is different to how it was if you go back a few decades. So the entry point I would say for anyone listening who's in that category, who's wanting to figure out how do I actually use my business? How do I use my wealth in a way that is about giving back or making a contribution? I would say that the first step is to realize that the way you make your money is just as important as what you then do with it. So don't externalize things. Don't push it off to either a down the track when I reach a certain amount of wealth or when I retire or when I sell the business. Bring that both in terms of time frame and in terms of how you can have impact. Bring that back to now, because you can do good now. You are making decisions. You are spending money in your business currently in ways that are already having an impact, positive or negative. And so you can just become more conscious of that and shift those decisions, shift the way you procure, how you spend money, how you treat your staff. You can do that now. So that would be the first piece. Don't wait. Actually start this process now and start it with the things you already have control over. It does connect us back to that aspect of the savior complex, because what can happen is, as a business owner, when you get to this part of, everyone lands there in different ways. Often we say, wow, I actually am incredibly successful by all external measures, but this doesn't really feel as satisfying as I thought it would. I've got the money, I've got the financial freedom, but there isn't that fulfillment or sense of purpose and meaning. What can happen is we then jump straight into that piece of, in order to get that, I need to start making donations or set up that foundation or give back. If we do that in a way that is uninformed and that hasn't done that apprenticing with the problem, we can actually create a whole bunch of unintended consequences because we're stepping into territory we don't yet understand. So while I do absolutely encourage generosity and giving, it's actually difficult to give money well. So that needs to be a well thought out process. We need to partner with the right people. We need to get the right advisors and make sure we're not accidentally making a problem worse in the process of having good intentions, but not actually knowing what we're doing. So start with what you know, start with the decisions you can already have control over, and see that business, or if you don't see yourself as a business, if you see yourself as an organization because your focus is around a nonprofit space, just look at the organization itself. Take responsibility for the decisions you're making, the way you treat people, the products and services you buy, and start in that place, because that is, to your point, where we are already having the biggest impacts in society, where we're already spending the most money, is through the organizational structure structures. As I mentioned at the beginning, small and medium enterprises are the biggest drivers of the economy. They are having impacts all the way from not just job creation and obvious metrics like that, but right back into our families. When you think about the culture that's created in an organization, if we disrespect and don't take seriously the well-being of our staff, whether that's related to the stress we put them under, whether we're paying them poorly, that has the flow-on effects of those people going home into their families, incredibly stressed, unable to pay bills or have confidence that they can support their family. And it has all of these negative impacts that go with it. So I think we need to shift what we think of as doing good and not see it just as, oh, unless we're eradicating poverty or we're taking plastics out of the ocean, it doesn't count. Well, it does. The way that you treat your staff, the suppliers you use and whether they are paid properly and have safe working conditions, all of those things build up to being the big systemic problems. And so starting where you already have control and influence is the most fundamental aspect of beginning this journey for any leader of any organization. And then doing the piece I spoke about of realizing that you can do good now, that you don't need to wait for some point down the track is the biggest piece of encouragement that I would give people.
Let me share what I'm taking away from that, Bessi. It's really powerful stuff. And for everyone out there in influential decision-making positions in companies, listen carefully to what Bessi is saying. This is really powerful. So the words that are coming to my mind are values and beliefs and living those values and beliefs, not just having them on the office wall on a plaque, but actually living them in your actions and your decision-making. Companies like Unilever and Starbucks are coming to mind, just thinking about what we've been talking about. So if you're in Starbucks and you're in a decision-making approach, what could you do? Could you go out there and help and support and invest sustainable growing of coffee beans and get out there in your supply chain, only do business with ethical companies that believe in the same things that you believe and support coffee growers in that way? Or could you start a charity after you retire for coffee growers? And what I'm hearing from Bessi, well, the former is actually going to be more impactful. You might do both, by the way, but you can do things right now before you get to your philanthropic stage of your life where you can be making decisions that then impact lots of people's lives. And in doing so, you're going to get more joy and fulfillment in your work because it's connected to your values and beliefs, and you'll find purpose and meaning in what you do. And you'll then start attracting and retaining staff around you that believe in the things that you believe, and they will get more joy and fulfillment from the work that you're doing as well, particularly if you treat them well, treat them with respect, et cetera, et cetera. So have a think about the impact that you are doing in your daily decision-making, not just how much money did I give to charity at the end of the financial year. What did you actually do in your actions through the year that support people around you and are in congruence with your values and beliefs? How does that sit with you, Bessi?
Yeah, it's a beautiful way of framing it because, again, if we look at these pieces and we say each of us is already having an impact, like I said before, and that piece and taking responsibility for that is more important now than ever. Whether you are, let me frame this in two ways. So I'll frame it for what the reality is going to be if you're running a non-profit, a charity, etc., and for those of you that are running a business. We'll start with the business side. It is now, you are not able to get away with what you used to be able to get away with in business. For many, many decades, people running a business have been able to claim as externalities a whole bunch of the consequences of their business that you now can't get away with for multiple reasons. We have had a massive shift in consumers' expectations and demands on businesses. And that goes to your point of it is no longer good enough to have a lovely set of values on the wall in your boardroom or on your website, but to not live those out. Consumers won't accept that. You can't claim something without being able to back up with evidence that you're actually doing that your behavior proves that. And there are significant consequences for businesses in terms of brand and the loyalty to a brand, and then drops in whether it's share prices or losing customers on the back of your behavior not stacking up with what you claimed you believed in. So there's shifts in consumer demand. There are massive shifts around employees and their expectations. And the amount of business owners that I'm speaking to who are saying way more than ever before when we're recruiting recruiting, it's very clear that we're being interviewed by this potential employee. It's not just us doing the interviewing, and that's different. They're asking questions they never used to ask before. Like, we have to have answers to these things, help. So that is shifting from the employee expectations. And then as a business, you are now operating in an environment where external regulation, compliance is shifting rapidly to the point that whether it is for you as a director or as an owner, the responsibilities you have and the need to actually not just say nice things or produce a lovely report with some photos, but to actually prove out that you are taking into consideration environmental impacts, that you are taking into consideration broader aspects around the environmental, social and governance, ESG, is coming at you faster than you're going to be able to adapt if you don't start to get on this. So as a business, those exact pieces you just spoke about are critical, not just to make you or your staff feel better. That's a beautiful thing, right? So I do want that in place for people. I want that sense of fulfillment because it will give us longevity to run these businesses for many decades to come. But it is also a risk mitigation strategy. It is also tapping into opportunity and having a competitive edge. So that's the pieces around the business that I wanted to profile. If we shift gears to a non-profit leader or someone running a charity who might be saying, this conversation is irrelevant to me. You're talking about money, growth, de-risking, etc. We're here to just do good and work with a beneficiary group. So this isn't relevant. In the last 5 years, so I do a bunch of advisory work for government around commercialization in the broader market, companies that are wanting to grow, scale, trade overseas. When I first started doing that work, very rarely would I see an application that came up asking for a commercialization grant that would sit in what I would see as an impact investment. So with my impact investment hat on, I was like, these are standard commercial deals, but they're not really having an eye for impact. In the last 12 months, consistently every round of commercialization grants, at least a third of them, I would consider an impact investment. And these are straight commercial deals. If you are running a non-profit or a charity, whether it's in Australian context in the NDIS space, so looking at the disabilities area, more and more organizations that are starting up are building incredible business models and have goals to scale and grow, have embedded from the beginning a deep commitment to purpose and contribution while also having a commercial model. So you are no longer dealing with people that simply have good intentions and have come at this from a traditional social sector space. You're now competing with organizations that have taken a commercial model and are bringing that fullness of what we are as humans, which is we want to contribute. We want to make a difference. That isn't unique to the social sector. That's a human component. So there is this aspect for the social sector to take into account, that the competition is growing and you will actually be outdone by, not just because they have a commercial scalable model. So it's not just about money, but their intentions are also there, that they're wanting to make a difference. So that's one issue. And the second point comes down to the other reason why in the social sector, we do need to grapple with this idea of breaking away from the deep belief and discomfort with money, is that when we start to do this work, when we are running an organization, we are raising the expectations of a beneficiary group that we can solve their problem or address with our solutions some of the struggles that they're having. There is a component where we actually need to then take responsibility for, can I do this in an ongoing way? And in a highly, highly competitive market around the shrinking pools of grant capital that is available, if our business model only works if those current funders stay interested in funding our programs, we do not have the confidence to be able to guarantee to a beneficiary group that we'll still be offering this service in 18 months, because there is no aspects of the components that are under our control that we've actually done the work to figure out, what do we have of value? Who would pay for that? How do we frame this in a way that delivers a value proposition? So that is as important, if not more, for the social sector than for a straight commercial model, because you have raised expectations and you now need to figure out, how can I have the confidence that I will be able to deliver this service in an ongoing way?
That's really powerful, Bessi. I want to play back a few things there. And this first one applies to both profitable businesses and also the charitable sector. So that this element I mentioned before about you attract and retain people around you that believe in the things that you believe. And at that point, I was talking about staff, but listening to you, it's more than staff. It's customers. You're going to attract customers that believe in the things that you believe, or repel customers if your actions are not in congruence with their value system. The other one that I'm going to add there, Bessi, is a groundswell now of ethical investment. So organisations like Vested, who now measure very accurately the environmental and social impact that companies have, so that even when private investors, even down to mum and dads through to institutional banks, are going to make an investment decision in a company, they are looking at things like environmental and social scores before they put their dollars down, so that they know that they're investing in companies that have values and beliefs that are congruent with their own values and beliefs. And so it's not just attracting staff, it's staff, customers and investors around that. Then I want to get onto this area around the not-for-profit sector, and maybe we need to rethink the word not-for-profit at some point. But the element that I'm hearing there are two things, Bessi, I'd like to unpack further. The first one is that profit is not a dirty word, and you do need to be able to generate money so that you can have a bigger impact. So even if you are very altruistic, it is money that is going to fuel your impact. If you want to have a bigger impact, you need to be able to get into a situation where you can have a perpetual generation of revenue that can fuel the impact that you're having. And the second one I'm hearing, which is connected, is then the sustainability of that. And you were talking about NDIS here in Australia. That's a great example of that. If you truly want to do good over a long period of time, you need to break the cycle of worrying about how much money are we going to get in next year's grants? How much money are we going to get through next year's financial year release of money from government? We need to get to the point where your own, even though it's altruistic work, is sustainable, because the people that you're serving don't want to hear 12 months from now that you don't exist anymore. How does that sit with you, Bessi?
Yeah, exactly. It's so important because, if we go to that aspect, the NDIS, again, as you said, we're working in an area where we want people to have that confidence that this will be offered again. And one of the pieces that I think we miss, if we make this conversation simply about money or growth, and then there's this discomfort and pushback that says, that's not why I come to work every day. I'm here to work with disadvantaged groups and to make sure they have access to things that should just be a fundamental offering in society. Okay, that's great. But this shift in mindset, this approach that says, I need to work with this model until I come up with something that is sustainable and that is not fully reliant on a grant dollar that may go elsewhere at some point, also allows you to actually make sure that you are having more impact and to actually tune you in to making sure that you give the respect and seek the input of that beneficiary group that you're seeking to serve. Because what I have seen in the last 20 years is that often in the non-profit sector, there is this assumption that because our intentions are good, because we were set up to help a certain group of people, it's a given that we're actually achieving those outcomes. And there is not always either the outcomes that prove that is the case or the respectful engagement with a beneficiary group to say, how are we doing? Are we offering the services you actually want? Are there better ways that we could do this? Would you like us to interact with you in a different way? When you treat your organisation and ignore the legal structure should be the last part of our conversation. So often we go to, what are we trying to do? Or that should be a non-profit. Let's leave the legal structure. It can fall out at the bottom of our business model. Irrelevant for the moment. If you actually learn how to think about your organisation through the lens of something like the business model canvas, for example, which I've been using for over a decade and I think is the best tool for this. If you're a non-profit leader and you actually said, okay, I'm going to begin to think about the organisation like this, and I want to give respect to the beneficiary group in a way that starts to ask them questions and desire to make sure we're actually delivering value to them and we're actually nailing the value proposition of what do they need from us in order for money to change hands. That shift is incredibly powerful in both ensuring that you achieve a better outcome, which you're saying is why you get out of bed every day. You're saying that's why you do this work. So don't you want to make sure you're getting the best outcome possible? It does that. And then it also allows you to make sure that you are running the best possible organisation in terms of how does that generate revenue and make sure that the money coming into your organisation is more than the money going out. It just allows you to ask the right questions, get the right data and build an organisation that is both more impactful and that has the confidence to do that in an ongoing way. That is a win-win for the social sector. So it's just another way of looking at it, not just making it all about money, but saying taking this lens and approach will improve the outcomes you're achieving and your sustainability at the same time.
I feel like we circled back there to a premise with the problem there, Bessi. That's really powerful. So, so we've got the cash element of it, making sure that the business can have a big impact, making sure that the business can be sustainable because of the people that you're trying to serve. And then I'm getting into, okay, what is our value proposition, and is it aligned to what the very people that we're trying to support and help? Are the services that we're delivering aligned to what they really need, or is it just what we guessed? So listening to them, understanding are our services hitting the mark or not, and then measuring the benefits realization. So the governance element here is to make sure that we're actually measuring against what we set out to achieve in the first place. And I think this can be lost because we get into the trees instead of the forest, whatever metaphor you want to use. In the daily grind of wanting to do good, you can get wrapped up into that and forget to sometimes take a 30,000-foot view and go, hang on a second, are we doing the best work that we could possibly do here? How does that sit, Bessi?
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful, beautiful summary of it. You said it much quicker and much more eloquently.
All right, very good. So we are delving into mindsets now, though. So these industries do attract very altruistic people. And if you start showing them P&Ls and balance sheets and scorecards, et cetera, their eyes may roll, right? So how do we get the mindset shift that these are the things that are needed to ensure the impact is multiplied and to ensure that the impact is sustainable? How do we achieve that mindset shift with someone who is genuinely a truly altruistic person who would probably do it for no salary just because of the impact that they're having?
So the first step that I would take, obviously, as you said, this is a big conversation. It's a shift that does need to occur, but that takes time in an organization that's driven from that side of the altruistic nature. But the first piece that I do with organizations who are coming at it from that view is to say, we don't need to jump straight into that sort of commercial model of, say, a business model canvas. We start with understanding your intent. So whether that's as an organization, what drives you, some of those things we talked about before of what are the values, how do you behave, what do you want to be part of creating in the world. So we do need to understand and respect those components of the actual intent of what we're trying to achieve here. The reason why that's important is because if you ignore that and jump straight into talking about the commercials and the financials and giving, the P&L and all of these things, as you said, people kind of will not only glaze over, but they'll also say, you've actually misunderstood why we're even here. This is not what we're about. So I'm really going to tune out. So we start by understanding the intent. Then what that allows us to do is when we transition into saying, okay, how do we make sure this organization can in an ongoing way deliver these services and achieve those outcomes that you said you want to be part of in the world? When we then get into understanding a customer segment, thinking about what our value proposition to them is, what tends to happen is people will frame as the value proposition the things that are actually their drivers as either an individual or an organization around their intent. And they'll be putting in that's why this is important. That's the value proposition. And we can then have a conversation that says those things that you're listing, remember our conversation around your intent. That's why you do what you do. That's what you believe and your drivers. But we're trying to shift perspective here and look at why is this important to those particular customer segments. So by honoring and respecting and doing the listening that we talked about before, listening first up to make sure we actually understand the drivers of that individual leader or that nonprofit, we're able to respect them, but to remind them as the conversation goes on, great, that's your intent. We need to make sure we design a business model that is aligned with your intent. We can't build something that's totally at odds with what you're trying to do, but your drivers and motivators may not actually be the same thing that drives a customer. Now that might be a beneficiary. It might be a grantor. There's a whole different range that will come out as customer segments for you in a non-profit model, but it helps us respect the organization, but also help them make that shift into taking the perspective of what are the people that we're serving actually looking for here, and what are those people who might be either fully or partially funding the work? What are they looking for? Because in a non-profit model, you very often, if not always, end up with having to understand your beneficiary group as a customer, as well as a funder or the person giving a grant as a customer segment. They both have reasons why they will or won't engage with you and what you need to deliver to them for them to be willing to interact with you. So in something like the NDIS, the person that you work with, even though they have a package of funding that is from the government, that person is still your customer, because unless they choose to work with you, their package is going to go to a different organization. So they are a decision maker in where that money is allocated. So you do need need to understand them as a customer, not simply a beneficiary, to make sure you are delivering something of value that they would allocate part of their package to your organization for the delivery of that service. And equally, you need to understand the rules, regulations, value propositions required for a funder to see you as someone fit to receive their funding.
So the words that are popping into my mind, Bessi, are around purpose alignment, but it's purpose alignment at every single level. So understanding who are the beneficiaries that we're trying to serve and what will serve them best, and then making sure everything is in alignment with that, whether it be the business model through to how we deal with grantors, investors, whatever the case may be, the beneficiaries themselves, that everyone is a stakeholder, but everyone is in that arrow towards the purpose alignment of what we're trying to achieve. And by having that language, we can then start having people understand that this is how you generate a multiplied and sustainable impact in what they're doing. That's really powerful, Bessi. This has been a wonderful conversation, so much richness in this topic, and you've given us so many nuggets of gold wisdom here. I'd like to bring us to a close now and go into our rapid round. So these are the same 4 questions that we ask all of our guests, Bessi, dying to know the answers from you. So, Bessi, what's the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
For me, that would be that the things that you find easiest are the things you should charge the most for. Don't know if you want me to go into that, but that would be it.
This is a new episode altogether. That's really powerful, Bessi, and it's about value-based pricing, all of those things, because that's your gift. That's your gift right there. If you find it easy and everyone else finds it hard, that you shouldn't be charging for an hour of your time. You should be charging based on the value.
Brilliance. Yeah, that's what I would teach myself.
Okay, that's brilliant. All right, thank you, Bessi. What's your favourite book?
It's a book called Beauty by John O'Donoghue. There's lots of things I love about it, but related to my work and having this both and mindset, he has this phrase that he talks about: beauty is the opposite of all forms of fundamentalism. And it's a quote that sticks in my head of just broadening out the way we think and catching ourselves if we fall into going to one extreme of a spectrum.
So that might answer our next question, which is, what is your favourite quote?
Well, so yes, I've given you a quote out of my favorite book, but the broader quote that I use all the time, that would be my favorite, is that you can't mistake movement for progress.
Yeah, very good. Okay. And this comes down to purpose is a vector. It's not velocity, it's a vector. It has a direction. I love it. All right. And finally, Bessi, there's going to be people listening to this that are really curious about everything that you've shared, whether they're a philanthropic investor through to people making business decisions in companies that have got the ability to impact the world, through to people working in altruistic roles in not-for-profits. There's a lot of great information in today's episode. How do people get in contact with you if they would like to know more about your work, also your services, and about your company?
The best way to do that is to go to my website, bessigraham.com, so we can share a link. And there you will be able to find a whole bunch of different things, including the podcast and other aspects related to just shifting this mindset. So I would encourage people to go there. Feel free to reach out to me via the website, and really happy to explore the conversation more.
Wonderful, Bessi. I will share with you very openly that I feel richer for having had this conversation with you today. Thank you so much. I know the audience will enjoy this as well. Thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your wisdom and experience with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Leadership Project at mixbeers.com. A huge call out to Faris Sadek for his video editing of all of our video content, and to all of the team at TLP. Joanne Goes On, Gerald Calabo, and my amazing wife, Say Spears. I could not do this show without you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel, where we bring you interesting videos each and every week. And you can follow us on social, particularly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, in the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and join us on this journey as we learn together and lead together.